think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening. Happy Tuesday to everyone. And welcome to Beyond the Micro Myth Realities and Opportunities in Macro Social Work. Joining me tonight, I am Dr. Shanita Williams, the Director of the Office of Field Education here at VCU School of Social Work. And joining me today, I have Allison Gilbreath. Allison Gilbreath is the Senior Director of Policy and Programs at Voices for Virginia's Children. She leads the organization's child welfare policy work as well as the implementation of advocacy programs, elevating policy conversations across all policy areas. Allison created Voices Foster Care Policy Network, a group comprised of partners, direct service providers, families, and youth who create a foster care unified agenda each year. She also helped to create the first ever bipartisan foster care caucus with the Virginia General Assembly. Allison, glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
And next we have Rachael Randall. As a Black woman, social worker, and healer, led by a value of community, Rachael has committed herself to making space for well-being and transformation of all shapes and sizes. As a consultant at the Spark Mill, Rachael upholds her integrity by supporting people and organizations in dreaming of viable futures and embracing structures and policies that maximize impact without burning people out. With superpowers in facilitation and community engagement, Rachael is passionate about working with teams, collaboratives, coalitions, movements, and system builders to share ideas, tools, and possibilities. Glad to have you with us, Rachael.
Thank you.
And next we have Lourdes Sandoval. Lourdes Sandoval is currently the Senior Case Management for The Border is Everywhere at Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia. In this position, Lourdes provides trauma-informed care and support services to individuals and/or families who have crossed the Mexican-U.S. border and are seeking asylum. With over 5 years of experience in resettlement, Lourdes is passionate about serving others and empowering individuals, especially refugees and asylum seekers. Glad to have you with us, Lourdes.
Thank you so much.
And next we have Chrissy Wengloski. Chrissy currently serves as the Principal Budget and Policy Analyst for Public Safety with the City of Richmond Department of Budget and Strategic Planning. In this role, she focuses on improving efficiency and effectiveness in the city's public safety departments, including police, fire, and justice services. She uses her social work background to ensure the city's policies and programs serves all of Richmond's diverse citizenry. Thank you, Chrissy, for joining us.
Thank you.
And then last but certainly not least, we have Alexa Zafarana. Alexa Zafarana was formerly trained as a macro level social worker and practitioner, but utilizes her experience as a coach and mentor in various roles. She has a passion for equipping individuals, families, groups, and organizations to flourish. She does this by providing others with practical tools and daily rhythms that create long-lasting change. Alexa works collaboratively with teams to plan, build, and assess sustainable systems and programs that support the goal to flourish. She is able to identify and capitalize on team members' strengths and help identify places for them to thrive. Alexa, glad to have you with us.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
All right, and without further ado, again, thank you all for joining us on this Tuesday, and we are going to start with our very first question for our panelists. For each of you, please share with us like your why, right? That's always a question that we tend to ask on social work. What's your why? So share with us your why, and how do you find yourself in this profession? How did you come to be where you are? What did or what has your path look like in getting to today? And so I'm just going to kick it off with Rachael.
Thank you. So I, like many people, went to social work school to become a therapist. I wanted to provide therapy. I was working in mental health already. And I was being told often that I just needed to perfect my craft to do it better. And I deeply wanted to work. I kept encountering little Black kids, little Black boys who were entering this mental health world. And I just wanted them to know that it wasn't them. And so when I got to social work school, I was in the like first day in macro practice, and they shared that analogy of like there's babies in the water and people are pulling the babies out. But then eventually you have to say, like, why are the babies in the water? And you go up the stream and there's a machine that's throwing all the babies in. And like that day, I definitely was like called to the machine. I was like, oh yeah, we gotta stop the machine. We don't need any more babies in the water. So that was one moment that I was really being pulled into the macro side of things. And then I watched a documentary also in macro class, and it was about the AIDS epidemic, and I cried because I was just so upset by this like visible act of racism in our systems and how it was being addressed. And so, like, from that moment, I'm like, oh, yeah, I need to end racism. So then I was doing that. And then human behavior told me that we can't just end things, we have to replace them. And so now I think a lot about like, how do we replace racism? How do we replace this human behavior of like disconnection so that way we can get to creating new machines, or really changing the machines that exist and are throwing people away. And so I really think a lot about how do we get well-being for people, especially within our workplaces, since that's where humans are spending a lot of their time. And I just think about well-being and healing and things of that nature to help us reconnect with ourselves, but also so we can reconnect with each other. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you for that, Rachel. How about Chrissy?
Sure. And just if everyone will bear with me, the Richmond pollen has gotten to my throat. So hopefully my voice will make it, but we will see. So I come from a public service family, law enforcement family specifically. And when I went through undergrad, that was actually what I thought I was going to do, was going to law enforcement. And before I did that, I realized that what I really cared about was specifically was working with victims of crime. And I decided that social work was actually a better avenue for me for that, because I would get to work with victims kind of throughout their journey, as opposed to mainly only the moment of crisis. So I started to go down the victim services route. And I also knew that I was really interested in impacting systems, cared about the issues that we see in law enforcement and how they affect victims and all of us, and really wanted to engage in systems level work. So that brought me to my M.S.W. And I also did the certificate in gender violence intervention from the Wilder School while I was at VCU. And that gave me an angle to kind of start combining that somewhat micro level work in intimate partner violence with the macro perspective through the macro track, and was able to do that through field placements at the YWCA Richmond, which I was more on the domestic and sexual violence side of that organization, and then at the state with the Department of Criminal Justice Services. So getting to see those as macro social work placements was really helpful, because I was able to see the direct impact that these organizations were having on victims, but also see them doing systematic work. And ultimately, as Dr. Williams introduced me, I'm now at the City of Richmond, and I am in budgeting and strategic planning. And that does not sound like your traditional social work role. So definitely wanted to open with that as well, because working with the police department and the fire department don't sound like what we learn necessarily in social work school. But really what budgeting is talking about what kind of programs and policies that we want for our community, and how do we distribute funds among those programs and policies, which in reality, we all know the funds are what make these things happen. So in my role, I'm really able to advocate for the programs that I've seen through my social work journey, and want to continue seeing in our community. And overall now my why is caring about this city as a community and making it as inclusive for folks who have all they need and folks who we have a lot of supportive services to provide for, and just making sure that everyone has what they need and is safe living in the city.
Thank you, Chrissy. Lourdes.
So my path, I would say, was a bit unconventional, I will say. So I actually decided to work first before going to obtain my undergrad. So I attended West Virginia University for my bachelor's in public health with a minor in human services with an area of emphasis of community and population health. I was actually part of the first graduating class. It was a small class, 9. We were all women. So being able to leave a lasting impact there with West Virginia and try to think what was next for me. Back in 2018, I started working for a resettlement agency here in Northern Virginia called Migration and Refugee Services, where I started off as their refugee health education and outreach liaison. So I was able to work with families from all over the world, with the majority of the population from Afghanistan, and providing them, health education, trying to understand the complexity of the healthcare system here in the United States, which even for us that were born here can be difficult as well. I was also, in partnership with the Greater DC Diaper Bank to distribute diapers to our clients that had children that were in need of diapers, baby supplies, you name it. From there, I was able to was promoted to a case manager. So I was doing what's called the reception and placement, where the first 90 days, I would provide, services for applying for benefits, Social Security, providing them housing. A requirement also is, the newcomer health screening. So following up with that as well with the health departments and in collaboration with community stakeholders. From there, I got promoted once again as the accounting coordinator. So I was the fiscal analyst for 4 of our offices, so overseeing all of that. And right around that time, I realized that, I was thinking about pursuing my master's, but was hesitant, with loans and trying to figure out what would be the next step. Since I was the first in my family to obtain a bachelor's degree, I would be the first for my master's. And I actually had a conversation with my now former boss, talking about what's next for me. How do I want to continue growing, in the resettlement field, in my career? And, he encouraged me with social work. He says, we do social work here every single day. You may not see it, but the impact that you leave for, the clients is, lasting a lifetime. And so I decided to apply for the online M.S.W program at VCU, and right during COVID. So when I got accepted, it was during COVID. We were in the lockdown and, having to work 9 to 5 at home and then shutting gears and focusing on school. From there, I was promoted yet again as a site supervisor. So running an office, one of the offices, and then again, another promotion back with finance, assisting with accounting coordinators to making sure that, we were being effective and, submitting things on time, which now brings me to where I am now as the senior case manager for a program called The Border is Everywhere, where we work with families and individuals that have crossed the border and are seeking asylum. So these folks come from all over the world, mainly Central America, South America. We have folks coming from Africa as well. And also from Afghanistan after what happened in Kabul 3 years ago now. So I provide intensive case management where I, focus on, the whole, person, making sure that I give them the dignity and worth, because it's, for them coming to me, it feels like I'm the first person that's able to hear their story and their why of leaving their home country to come here, and making sure that, they're being offered, trauma-informed care. I always knew that I wanted to help others and create a lasting impact, especially for folks in my community. And that's where I am now.
Lourdes, thank you for that. Thank you. And let's go to Alexa.
Dr. Williams. I would say mine is kind of twofold, and I have a personal reason and kind of a professional path. My sister was really sick when I was growing up, and I think that just showed me another side of systems and things. And as I'm the oldest girl in a family of 7 kids, so I've always had that advocating and kind of watching out for the flock mentality. My family is really important to me. And then I think from a professional side, I got my BSW and MSW, but my BSW, I really had a kind of like a wandering path. I was a communications major. I actually ended up going to school for fashion merchandising and was like, this is not the right fit. Like, I cannot just talk about clothes all day long. And I had a moment, I had been volunteering through my undergrad, and the moment of clarity was that I helped this kid come out from under the sink when he was mad at people. And I was like, oh, this is the good stuff. Like, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to help people. And from that, so I got my BSW from Colorado State. And I would say that professionally, I kind of chose the next best thing in my different paths. So really enjoy working with youth and families, probably predominantly. I worked within and beside the foster care system back in Colorado, in home with people, and then did some stuff in schools with CIS, and then have worked back in the foster care system with teen moms. And now I'm with Richmond Public Schools, and I'm a field liaison with the School of Social Work. And I love getting to mentor students in their path, and that's another place of passion. So as Dr. Williams shared, kind of like what I've consolidated is that I really, really want to see people thrive in all these different areas, and I've worked on different sides of the spectrum. I think my passion is really meso work. I really love working with groups and kind of getting to go high and low in perspectives. And Dr. Odera, who works at the School of Social Work, she saw me as a student, was like, actually told me, I know, right? Shout out to her. She was actually the one who's like, I think you're a macro social work because you can zoom out. And what I've seen about my path is I'm able to zoom in and zoom out, which has been really important for me to be able to, like, even earlier today, I was working with a group of kids, lighting up, and then I can take that work with them and think, how do we create systems and how do we empower other professionals to work with this group the way that I got to today? And then another just passion area I want to put out there, I run with a community group called We Off the Couch. I am really involved in my church. So community as a whole, a holistic, like, how do we care for our bodies, minds, souls, and spirit is really another one of my whys, plus family, obviously.
Thank you, Alexa. Allison.
Yeah, thanks for everyone who's joined today. My why also starts with the personal. For me, I have lived experience in the child welfare system. And while I didn't have the words to articulate it at 10, 11, or 12, the frustration that I was feeling like everyone worked around me, not next to me, or I didn't have a voice. I felt extremely voiceless. I knew that I wanted to do something where I could amplify the voices of young people, children and young people. I didn't exactly know what that was. My original intent was to go to law school because that's all I was really exposed to. Like a lot of, I think, macro social workers, like all we know is like attorney when we think about speaking up on behalf of clients or something like that. I was very lucky where I was sort of accidentally introduced to the macro program through a person who was interning at my previous job when I was like in between undergraduate and graduate school. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And it's about $80,000 cheaper than law school. So that will work. I also knew that I was really interested in policy. So I never had an interest in clinical social work in the way that I think some students, I would say the majority of students come into the program. I knew I wanted to do public policy. I just didn't know exactly what my path would look like. My personal biased opinion is that social workers do public policy better than almost every other sector. I think that we come to it with a holistic view. I care deeply about the how we do public policy, not just the why. The why is important, but like how we engage with the community. I don't want to bring a policy where I haven't connected with the community in order to do that. Like that is silly. But it's also using so many different skills. It's also connecting and relationally with members of the Virginia General Assembly who don't look like me, who didn't grow up like me. I'm often the only one with lived expertise in the child welfare system, but I have found power in that. And I think my why, I think it's important for all students or anyone in life to know that your why constantly changes. And my why is different than it was when I graduated the program. Like it's still connected to that root of who I was as a child, but I'm a different person now. My why is deeply connected to motherhood. I'm raising two wonderful young children who are 6 and 3 and who have both struggled in their own ways developmentally. And I have seen how I have a whole master's degree and I'm struggling at times making sure that my children have the access to tutors, to therapists, to whatever they need to thrive. And I think about them all the time. If I have a master's degree and my husband has, and I'm married and I have a dual income and my husband has a pretty good job that affords us a very nice life, if we are struggling to raise our children, what do we expect of anyone else in the community? And I don't think it's fair that depending on your zip code and what family you were born in determines your destiny of your life. So that is really like pumping my why these days.
Thank you, Allison. I don't know about you all, but I think just hearing these panelists, we could probably end right there on that note, right? Because what the theme that is throughout, I'm hearing you all talk about like overall well-being, right? This genuine care and concern of wanting to help and thinking about things from, the babies, right? But to the machine, and it's the how we address these issues. And each of you have talked about this use of self and how you use yourself, but also your brain. I've often said that the macro practitioner, that trained macro practitioner, has this, I think, innate ability to see big, but innately see small. And I think we don't always see that translate, I think, from a clinical standpoint. But Allison, you and what you shared about macro practice leads me to this next question, and it is about like misconceptions, right? We're talking about, we often hear micro macro, and so I am curious about, what you all's thoughts are around the misconceptions of micro and macro social work practice. And Allison, just again, your end comment made me think about maybe perhaps we'll start with you and then anyone else who wants to jump in, please.
Sure. I think that for shout out to any of you who are my current students or a previous student, because I do teach in the M.S.W program as well, just as an adjunct professor. And part of my why for teaching that is I had only one person of color as a professor in my entire program. And I was like, absolutely not. Like that, I had Dr. Lee and her teaching style like changed the trajectory of my life. And I felt like it's deeply important for students to have professors who look like them. Anyways, that's a sidebar. But I think that the misconceptions in macro social work versus micro social work are deeply entrenched into all schools of social work, but I think especially in VCU. I think that there is this, all of my students who are in the macro cohort, who are in my field class, they often are like terrified that they're not going to find a job because, again, what is so clear to everyone else is like that career trajectory for clinical social work. Like you can see it, where macro social work, you have to dream it. And I have taught the macro program for 4 years. And I've never had a student not be able to find a job. In fact, it's often the reverse. There are so few of us that we often have options. I had multiple job offers when I completed the program, but people don't hear that or don't see that. They think that you have to have an LCSW to do these certain career paths. And that's just not true. Nobody cares if I don't need to have an LCSW to do my job. Most macro practitioners are not working in clinical settings. We're usually working around people who don't have an M.S.W. They're interested in you for your unique skills, abilities, and talents because of what you bring with an M.S.W. background. But my colleagues, I have one M.S.W. coworker, and I hired her because I wanted an M.S.W. coworker. Like that, it's just not the norm. I think the other big myth is salary. Like I think people assume that clinical social workers make a certain amount of money, when they get into quote unquote private practice and whatever. But I will tell you, I'm doing very well for myself. I think we are not poor over here. I don't know why people believe like we take some vow of poverty when we do not. I want to live in a good school district. I want to send my kids to good schools. I want to go to Disney World every other year or every year possibly. Like I want those things too. So I think that creates this myth that you can't do macro social work. And here's the other thing, and I'll pass the mic to whomever else wants to join in. So many students tell me they're going to go ahead, get their LCSW just so that they have it, just so they have it in the background, and then they're going to go into policy later, is what they often tell me. Like, I want to come work for you in like 5 years after I do private practice, or I don't want to say just private practice, after I do clinical social work. And I'm like, awesome, but I'm going to have to start you at the bottom. Like, you're not going to roll into my agency with zero public policy skills. I can start you off as a junior policy analyst, and you're going to make what a macro social worker makes right out of grad school, because y'all are starting at the same. Yes, some skills are transferable, but it's not the same. And so I'm like, you just got to understand that what happens in that first 5 to 7 years post grad school is like, it's really like this. Your career goes like this. And so when you try to jump into another train because you were afraid to do macro social work, well, you got to start here where everybody else in that cohort that's graduating that same year is. So I'm gonna pause there, and whomever else from the panel who would like to jump in.
I'll jump in if that's okay. I just wanted to quickly, because I agree with everything Allison said, also being in a policy space. The one thing I just wanted to add too is that you can do macro social work anywhere. And I think sometimes while there are tons of jobs, like Allison said, that we think of very specific things as macro jobs, program directors and policy directors, but you can do macro social work in any environment that you are comfortable being in with your own values, because you bring your social work values with you and you're able to influence policies and programs from a social work perspective. So there aren't macro jobs. Macro social workers go out and do jobs in their community.
I just wanted, Chrissy, thank you for that. I think that's a great point. And even when I love how Allison said, dream of your future, because even as I dream of my own future as social work, I have some out of the box ideas of what would be kind of the ideal place for me. But I think, to the point, there's so many transferable skills, not just with social work, with business. When I think about we have community engagement, program planning, program development, leadership, facilitation, those are some incredible skills that you can take places. And I want to add that I think that there's so much clinical work that you do in macro practice, and you really do need to be versed in how to do clinical work as well. So because we're working with people, right? So whether you're working with a student, I'm just thinking my roles, I work with a student, a family, or another social worker, or school admin, or you're having to figure out what motivates people. How do you communicate? How do you switch up your communication to be more effective? And so I find myself having to pull on clinical skills often, especially as somebody who really loves this meso space. So one of the misconceptions I think is that I think clinical and macro level social workers, like we live in each other's waters more than we think. So you do need to be cross-trained. And one of the things that used to bother me in grad school is like people would be like, I can't work with people. That's why I'm going to be a macro. Like, no. You need to know how to work with people. Because if you want to change systems, and which is incredibly hard work, you're going to have to learn how to adapt in the most like fine-tuned way. And to the point about like one of my students said this the other day that I loved. They're like, as I'm learning how to do social work, I feel like I'm learning a new language. And I was like, that's so beautifully put. And so when you're working with non-social workers, it's like, how do you talk to somebody in French who doesn't speak French? So you might have to learn their language and what matters to them and their values and not lose your values. Like that's a lot of internal work that you're doing to be effective. So I would just say, like, I think the misconception is that like we live in these different worlds. I think our macro, I just want to shout out Alex Wagman. We learned a lot about leadership and organizations, and so we really were able to evaluate things from different, which I think is powerful for any social work student.
All right. Well, thank you all. I'm hearing excitement about multiple job offers. Don't worry, you will find a job. There are these unique skills and abilities that being a macro trained social worker has, this idea of being cross-trained as well. And that leads me to my next question, because at the heart of what I do is field education. And so you all had to come through, as you came through this program, you completed a field placement or two, depending on the track. But my question is, where were you placed for your practicum or your field education experience, if you like to share that? And what impact or influence did your experience have on your current positioning in the field? Right, not necessarily where you are now, but just how it helped with that trajectory. And then also, how did you create opportunities in your practicum? I know it's a loaded question, but really wanting you all to share your experiences in field and how that, how it influenced and impacted you. Anyone
I
want
guess
to
I
take that
can
question?
go first.
Lourdes?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did 2 field placements. So for my generalist, I did it with an organization called Ascending Counseling Solutions, where I worked with at-risk youth in Alexandria, Virginia, to help them, build positive coping skills, but then also as well, promoting effective cognitive behavioral interactions and behavior. So, a lot of these kids would come from, dysfunctional households where there might just be a single parent, or, they will have trouble in school with bullying or, low grades. So I would be part of the after school program where, we would do activities, have, sessions one-on-one with these at-risk youth, and to help them develop, positive coping skills to help them, succeed as they continue, growing up. So I did that for my generalist. For my specialization, it's actually where I'm currently working now, the Warriors Everywhere. So it's a pilot program in its 3rd year right now. So I was actually selected to be the lead intern. We were a team of 5 M.S.W interns, where, we were focusing on providing services not only for folks that were in our database system, but also folks that would come into our office seeking services. And we would do our best to provide, services in the perspective of trauma-informed, culturally relevant, and human-informed. So, we work with different populations, and with my background in resettlement, I've been able to work with different populations. So I was able to use the tools that I used working in resettlement, for the 5 years before transitioning over, and, giving that to my, co-interns as well, so they can understand, how to work with, other cultures, but then also, bringing in colleagues from their same country just to understand, like, we want to be able to work, well and build rapport with our clients. We want to understand, where they come from. And then of course, for us as well, making sure that we have cultural humility as well. As far as, with the impact of where I am, I work now for the program. So I'm the sole case manager for this program. So being able to, build relationships, with my clients and learning about their story as their reasoning as to why they made the journey, leaving their home country, coming here to the United States, it's very eye-opening, and it kind of, gives me a better idea of, their background, why they came here, but then also, thinking of the future, thinking ahead, hopefully that this program can expand. We can, write these stories and explaining, like, we have these folks with, professional backgrounds. I had clients that were professors in their home country. I had entrepreneurs as well, and they had to leave everything behind, and come here and start new. So being able to be the stepping stone essentially for them to start their life here, making sure that they understand, the legal system here, which is very complicated, attending their court hearings, having to go to ICE, for their check-ins, and then also making sure that they are being compliant in general and making sure that there are no, fraudulent activity. So I do a lot, when I was an intern, we were in the second year of the pilot program where they were trying to do the hypothesis, are social workers essential for this program, yes or no? And it was a resounding yes. Attorneys, they do not have time to provide them resources. Oh, you can go here to this local food bank to go get food. Oh, you need to go to the clinic. Let me send you information. That's where we come in as social workers to be able to provide those resources and, also advocating for them as well. If, they're in need of something, to advocate and let them know that, it is possible here, and giving them that empowerment, that encouragement that, while things may be difficult right now, months later, things will look up from there. So being able to bring that positivity for them, when I meet with the clients.
Um, in hindsight, I think I think definitely knowing things that you're interested in helps to steer the field experience. I was very interested in working with little Black youth, little Black kids, and I said that often in my field, and so I ended up in places that would offer me that opportunity. But I think my second year, my macro year placement, I worked in a small community nonprofit, and I had a really strong field teacher. They used to be a professor in the macro program, and so they actually had me do a lot of like poking holes, like asking stupid questions about like how this organization operates, like what are the grants that we are a part of, and what are the deliverables, and trying to understand how did we even get here? How did we decide this was the grant to do? One of the things I learned through that field placement, and I don't think I realized it at the time, but I know now, is like most organizations are very messy. Lots of nonprofits don't have it all together. And so, like, reading organizational documents, like how was the board supposed to work? Going to board meetings is always interesting. What do they decide to talk about? What decisions are they making? Especially after understanding the role of boards and that relationship with nonprofits. Um, so like all of that, like how does this organization actually function? Especially when the organization that you're field at does minimal activities, because macro practice isn't a lot of field one-to-one interpersonal. It's a lot of like, how is this program operating? What's the change that this organization is trying to make? And so like taking time to read organizational documents and understand if that information comes out, if that's clear, like if you can't understand it, the community probably doesn't understand it. A lot of mission work. I think I was just looking over some of my old notes and I was talking about them with mission. Is our mission clear? Are we all on the same page about what this mission means? And so all of that were opportunities that I did in my field. I also just said yes to a lot of things. Like I'm a high functioning person. I love to be active. And so anytime they were like, hey, do you want to show up at this coalition? Do you want to go to this meeting? Do you want to come and do this? I kind of said yes to, like, if I was free, I said yes to it. Sometimes probably used, probably being taken advantage of at times. There's a few activities, but I had a field teacher that really allowed me the space to process things after I did them. And that was really beneficial and like super important to our work in the world. I do a lot of processing on our projects with my team and things like that. In my field, it ended up being that the board president at the time is the owner of the firm that I work in. And so definitely relationships, people will hire you because they know you, they've built relationships with you, they're excited about the skills that you can do, or you've been able to demonstrate them. And that relationship is what led me to the job that I have now.
Can I answer this from a liaison perspective too? Because I think, just to Rachel's point, I think the things, no matter what tasks you have, really what we want students to do is think through things and be a critical thinker. And I always say, like, what are the questions that you're asking? And you don't always have to know the answer, but I really want to see students and myself like asking the hard questions. And then I think another note just about like, we evaluate the systems that we're working in. Systems can be a lot like family. So if you've done family work, then you know that there's just some, like, you have some family drama, you got the auntie and whatever, grandma enables mom. It's been going on since 1972. Like, organizations can be like that. And again, so we want to have like critical eyes to look at things, to ask questions. And that can be really powerful. And you can do that, right? I did that. I remember I also had a field instructor who was very well versed in that and like let me ask a lot of hard questions, and we did. And I try to provide that same piece to the students I work with.
I can share as well. My first year placement was at the Department of Criminal Justice Services. I really wanted to I didn't want to work with children. I wanted to do work on behalf of children. So at first, when I got that placement, I was like, the Department of Criminal Justice Services, what does that have to do with children? But I'm glad I went and met with I had my field liaison at the time was Cameron, and she was like, just go to the interview, Allison, please. Like, I placed you there for a reason. And she was right. I ended up working with one of my mentors, Melissa, who's the director of the Court Appointed Special Advocates Program, which is all about kids, foster care. It was my jam. I definitely got to see what it's like to work in a super hierarchical, I can't ever say that word, organization. And they were like, oh, you got to send things up the ladder, down the ladder. I was like, oh gosh. I remember just getting like a flyer for an event approved. I had to go all the way up to like the agency director and back down the chain. So it was a good, I was like, you know what? I don't know if state agency work is for me. There are just so many layers to it. But I was grateful for the experience because I still work with a lot of state agency folks, and I understand the challenges that they have in their roles because of the structure of which they work in, the system in which they work in. My second year placement, I finessed a little bit. I was placed at the lieutenant governor's office. And one thing, I knew that the lieutenant governor was really, really interested in children's policy. He was a pediatrician. He was all about kids. He had just started the Council on Childhood Success, or whatever it was called. And I knew that he was planning on running for governor. So I was like, okay, if I can get into his office now while he's the lieutenant governor, I could possibly have a connect when he is governor. So I basically begged them to take me as a field placement. They had never had an M.S.W, but I was like, I'll do whatever. I'll get your coffee, whatever. And they were like, sure. And I was like, and I also have a lot of expertise in child policy, which they did not. They were like very interested in it, but did not have expertise. So I ended up serving on all these different work groups that were forming children's policy issues. My biggest thing there was just connections. When you're in an administration or a big individual politician's office, everybody is coming to your office for a meeting. So I would just like finesse my way into every meeting and say, like, I'm Allison and can I get coffee with you? So I was like getting coffee with everybody, all the directors at like every organization in Virginia. They were like, who is this girl? Like, and who knows everybody? Everybody knows Allison because I just kept putting myself out there. And then, of course, he did win the governor's race, which helped me immensely when I went to go apply for this job. And I was like, and I used to work for the governor, so you should hire me because he knows me on a first and last name basis. I have seen him brush his teeth in the bathroom. Like, I have connects. And it helped, like when I am hiring people, it is helpful from a public policy standpoint, when they're coming in with some connections that maybe I don't have or they have or whatever the case may be, that's really important. So that's I think one of the things in macro social work that isn't talked about enough, but if you are my student, you know that is all I talk about, is because it's all about who you know. And it's all about your circle. And I think as a student, you have the best time to meet people for coffee and learn and get to know people, because this system is a washing machine. We all get put in the washing machine, we rumble up, we mix each other, we quit our jobs, we take the other person's job, whatever. It's just the same. It's the same people in a system. We're just job hopping around to each other's jobs for pretty much our careers. So be nice to people. Don't piss your internship people off because they all know everybody. Be kind, be nice. It's important.
Thank you all for that. Hearing just this, again, reoccurring theme around like connections, relationship building, networking. Field is that place where, you know, the cliche, the rubber hits the road. And so where we spend all this time learning, and necessarily so theory, how do you put it into practice, right? When it's time to perform and produce. And you all are talking about things like say yes, of course, within reason. Rachael, your the comment around our work in this world, right? Our work in the world. And so thinking critically, like Alexa has said, in terms of where you are, where you're positioned, who you can connect to, not only just for yourself, right, but for the larger systems and organizations. And so you all have alluded to this already. I'm just wondering, when you think about your time in school, in field, you know, how did what you learn, right? Social work principles and values and theories and skills help translate, or how did that translate to real world practice? Because again, it's where the rubber meets the road. Can you perform and, you know, for lack of a better word, produce like for these systems and these changes that we want? So how did what you learn, how are you able to translate that into real world practice? If anyone wants to take that question.
Sure, I can start just briefly. I think sometimes it's, you know, we think of all these fancy theories and everything that we learn in social work school, but for me, it comes down to the very basic concept of needs assessments and folks' autonomy. And in a policy space, just being able to ask the question, you know, do the folks who we're making this policy for want this policy, or how are they going to react to it? And that, while folks around you, if they're not social workers, you know, they may not be thinking that way, but getting ahead of potential impact of policy, you know, we all know there's intent and impact of policy, being able to get ahead of it, I think is something that social workers are particularly well equipped to do, because of the way that we're trained to think about the needs of the population and how folks should be able to make their own decisions about whether they want services or how they want to interact with their community. So I think just carrying that through field, through coursework, and bringing that into the actual macro practice is very real.
I'll jump in. I think, again, another shout out to Dr. Wagaman, who teaches I don't even know what the class is called, but we all know what she teaches. I think one of the greatest things that she taught us was The Art of Facilitation. It's an actual book she made us read. I don't know if she continues to make everyone read that book, but I think that is a skill I use daily. And she broke down things to me that I think people just don't think about. Like when you start a meeting, having meeting agreements, having an understanding and a purpose of why a group is meeting. How many meetings have we been to and we're like, what are we doing here? Is this just because we have to have this meeting? And so when I joined, you know, my organization and I got a little bit more confident in myself, I'd say like, what are we doing? Like, what is the purpose of here? How can we restructure this? How can we take turns leading the meeting? What is your facilitation style like? What is my facilitation style like? My facilitation style is very different because I'm very aware of who I am and my purpose in this world. I show up unapologetically as a Black woman, and it can be jarring to people when they're not used to it. but also I have to be confident and comfortable in who I am, because it's how I lead, it's how I facilitate. And I feel like I do a pretty good job of that. But that like leadership facilitation stuff, there are just too many people who are in leadership roles who actually haven't been taught how to be a leader. And it's very frustrating to be in those spaces when you just want to be like, I can help you. Here's a class, a book, something. But a lot of people just get thrown in to these roles and actually aren't equipped with the skills to do those roles.
Can I add on to it that about leadership? I think two things. I have not always been ready for the positions I've been in, and I've had to do a lot of continuing education. Like I am currently kind of taking myself through a self-taught leadership course, trying to like talk to the best leaders, listen to podcasts, because I'm like, I know some areas that I need to grow. Like I got kind of thrown into a coaching role and tried some things and they completely did not work. And I had been in a spot in social work where I was feeling pretty comfortable with some of what I was doing. So then I was like, okay, this doesn't work. My skill set's not where it needs to be. How do I like SOS? Like, and something my mom's always said is like, when you don't know what to do, go back to your foundation. So like the foundational core skills, right? The code of ethics, like you can go back to those core skills, but you're going to have to build off of those. Um, and just working with systems, like why do things not change, right? And so that lens of human behavior has been so important to my work, especially in the last couple of years. Like when we see some cyclical problems, when we see we're trying to implement systems in schools and we feel some resistance, like why is that happening? And you have to be able to look at human behavior and what's happening, and traumatized systems, and what happens when a system or a city like Richmond is traumatized, and how does that impact the work we're doing. But my favorite that I talk to my students about is the stages of change, because I think it works with individuals and people. Like when you think about like their readiness to change, that usually gives me empathy when I'm like, you are not ready. We are having so much resistance. Okay, you're in pre-contemplation. This all makes sense. And then, so then because of that motivational interviewing and like listening for change language, I'm like, oh, they're like considering that we would maybe do this. So I think those are two of my favorites. And then, like I said earlier, kind of looking at organizations through some family systems theory has been fun lately. That's my like new track that I've been on. I'm like, this is fascinating.
Thank you, Alexa. I want to be mindful of time in the event that people have questions. But I do want to ask, I do have a parting question, but I'm going to throw in there to see if anyone is interested in just answering this, because we talk about self-care, we talk about burnout, and the work that you all do, you all are seeing it, both ends and in between. And so how do you hold on to hope? Like, how do you hold on?
Ooh, that I'll start, because I think this is like probably all our current struggle, which is why we were probably a little bit quiet. It's really hard. I think one, don't get into macro social work because you think it's going to be like less traumatizing. I hear that a lot from clinical social workers. They're like, oh, or people like, I went macro because I couldn't handle the trauma of clinical social work. I'm like, macro social worker is far more traumatizing, because you're not letting down one client. I'm letting down thousands. So it's different. It's a different kind of trauma. I just ended the Virginia General Assembly session, which is the most stressful time of year for my team, for myself. And it was frankly the hardest legislative session I've ever had in my career. And this is my 8th one with this organization, but like I've been around the political world for like 15 years. And so that says a lot. I'm holding on to hope with honestly the pouring into other people. I cannot do this work forever. Like it's not possible for me. I already know that about myself. Like I have to have other things lined up because this isn't sustainable. But teaching students and laying the seeds for them to carry on the things that I can't finish because of whatever reason is extraordinarily important to me. And I don't mean that in just of the terms of like preventing burnout. It's like just my life. I at some point, all of us will not be here anymore. I know that's like doom and gloom, but that's truly how I feel. And I'm like, I don't know if I can end racism in my lifetime. I hope we do. But if I don't, it is important for me to impart knowledge to others, to students, to others in the field, so that that can give me hope. Like my students in my class give me hope. When I end a semester with them, I'm like, I needed y'all more than you needed me. Trust that, because this is hard work. I need to know that there's other people out here that can do this work, not just me. And the other thing is get paid and get paid well, because that does help. Paydays help when I am getting paid a certain amount of money and I can afford to go on vacations and take care of things. Like, I think people talk about self-care, like bubble baths and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, self-care to me is always going to start with my paycheck. If I cannot afford to send my kids to the things that I want to do, daycare is expensive, summer camp is expensive. I just registered my son for all these summer camps. That's a couple $1,000s. If I can't afford to do that, that's a mute point right there. So I'll stop there.
I think for me, like my burnout just comes from like it's in the form of rage of just like the intersection of being Black and a woman. I'm often thinking about how we could just do things differently. Like there's lots of other ways to be doing things, and sometimes it just feels like no one wants to view that, see that, have that conversation. And so for me, it's exciting because I'm just going to continue to have the conversation anyways, everywhere that I am. But I also really like, I'm a big emergent strategy person in my thinking. And so it's a reminder to me that it starts with my own self. Like, I want to liberate all of Richmond. I want everybody to be healed. And I have to keep coming back to I liberate others by just liberating myself. By doing the social change with the people who I'm talking about social change with. Have friends, your social work friends, or like your friends for a lifetime. We think about things in similar ways, and that's a space that gives me a lot of hope because we're constantly thinking about how do we transform ourselves. So that way we can be in the communities that we really dream of and that we want to be a part of.
I think for me, similar to Rachel, I identify as Latina, and, working with the population that I serve, there are frustrations day in and day out. Just last week, I had an experience with an ICE officer over the phone, where my client, it took her 2 hours with an Uber to get to Richmond because that's where her ICE check-in was, and for them to deny her entrance. And I had to speak with this individual, and he was very dismissive, saying it's not the end of the world. Yes, it is. You don't understand what these folks are going through. They're trying to be compliant, going to their check-ins, and for you to tell me that it's not the end of the world is just it's gut-wrenching. You don't want to hear that, right? So I, at least as far as hope, I'm very thankful for the team that I have here. Quick shout out to Hex for those that y'all know. He's, my boss here, but he makes it sure that like we're all, being taken care of. When we do our team meetings, we like to do mindfulness before we start the meeting. So, breathing exercises or any other activities to get us in the right mindset before we step into the difficult, stuff that we have to talk through. We go out together as a team, team lunches where we get to like not focus about work for 30 minutes to an hour, where we're enjoying each other's company. Being able to have that great, working dynamic among, our team members is something that I truly cherish. And I'm forever thankful. They're the reason, one of many reasons why that, I feel like I can continue to do the work that I'm doing, and just being able to see the change and positive impact that I have for my clients.
Awesome. Last question as we bring this one home. What pearls of wisdom can you share with our guests, particularly our emerging macro-focused practitioners, about how to navigate in a macro space? So what little nuggets might you all share as we leave from this space?
I think I really, something Allison said earlier really gave me what I wanted to say for this, which was she talked about being an intern in the lieutenant governor's office and having this level of knowledge that folks around her didn't. And this is something that I would say is a big takeaway for me, is that while we want you to get the best job that you can, coming straight out of the master's program, you may not be that program director. It may be a more entry level position, but never underestimate the amount of influence you can have in one of those positions, because very often your decision makers have a million things on their plates and they do not have the specialty knowledge that you may have in your area of interest. So do not feel that just because it's not the level of position that you maybe are hoping to get, that you can't have an influence. And because definitely just if you have the research and skills to share facts and reasons why you think a decision should be made, the skills that you have through this program, that is how you can influence decision makers and influence the systems that you work in.
I'll jump in. I will say, figure out what you're afraid of now, whether it be when you're in the program or when you're first finishing. We're typically all afraid of something. I often tell my students they're like afraid of being fired often, especially in their first job, but really like dig deep and figure out what it is really that you are afraid of. When I did that exploratory work with myself, it was really about financial security, which is real. Like, we need money to survive, to thrive, whatever. And if you've been in my class before, you'll know I talk about, like, I got out of debt my first year postgraduate school. I basically lived on nothing and paid all my debt, everything clear, free and clear, because that fear of losing my job for whatever reason was holding me back from my greatness. And so, like, figure out what it is that you are afraid of and just work through it. For me, it was finances. I'm not afraid, like, fire me, please, because I have 6 months of savings and it'll be no problem. And I show up authentically and differently. People are like, why can you say what you want? Because I'm not afraid of the consequence that you are afraid of. I'm not going to be mean or rude to anyone ever. It's really important for me to be respectful, but I'm not afraid. So just consider what you're afraid of.
I can go next. I just, that spurred a thought of not speaking truth to power, but figuring out how to do it. I really wrestled and have struggled, sometimes doing it really well, sometimes not. I've always been a truth teller, but it's like, how do I say my truth in a way that people will hear, that will impact change? And I think the other thing is just lead yourself. So like Chrissy was saying, you're not always going to be in the role that you envisioned to start off with, but one of the leadership experts I've been listening to talks about the most important part of leadership is leading yourself. So how do you show up in rooms? How do you monitor like all the different parts of your life that are important to you? Because that will say a lot about how you can lead and work with other people. So I would say start with yourself. You are the tool. And so you should know what the tool is, right? You should know the tool's triggers. You should know what brought you into the work. You should know all those different pieces, and that will help you in your social work career.
I think a thing that's important and that I continue to like gets reinforced for me often is like the change that we seek is going to take time. It's not going to happen in a year, in the next couple of years, like especially the type of change like I seek as a social worker, that real deep social change at those root levels, like collaboration to do things differently takes time. For us to be in relationship, we have to give that time. And so just knowing that all of those relationships that you need lots of little touches, lots of comfort and nourishment. So that way we can collectively, like, because we can't do it alone. Like, one of the things I thought about is like one of the myths I think about is that you can do macro without micro, or that you can do micro without macro. Like, all of it requires relationship, and all of that takes time, so that way we can really make the changes that we want. And so being patient about that to get that collaboration to really move things.
guess just quickly for on my side, I would just say, a big thing, as Rachel mentioned about, being patient, be kind to yourself. Things don't happen overnight, please be kind to yourself. This work, is, I find it, fruitful, but it can also be exhausting at the same time. So just reminding yourself to take care of yourself. And something that I always say to my colleagues, if you can't take care of yourself, how can you take care of others? So being very mindful of that, as you, continue with your education and then with your career as well. As I mentioned, working for Catholic Charities for almost 6 years, I have, progressed over time, having all these different skill sets that I never would have imagined. And hopefully, maybe I'll, start, stepping into much bigger leadership roles down the line. But, it's having that patience and being able to, put yourself out there and be like, I'm willing to learn, honestly.
All right. Well, that brings us to 7:07, and I want to be mindful of folks' time. And I want to say, I don't know about you all, but I am full from the conversation, full from what our panelists have shared in terms of their journey, how they got to where they are with respect to their traveling through this very social work program and through their experiences in field education. And so I am grateful for just the wisdom that you all have imparted on us tonight, and very thankful that you all were able to carve out time from your busy schedules. And so I thank you all, and wish everyone a good night.